Hello, and welcome to the Upgrade the World podcast. I'm your host, Josh, and in this episode, I'll be discussing the United States Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. At the July 2024 Bitcoin conference in Nashville, Wyoming Senator Cynthia Lummis announced the Bitcoin Act of 2024. Lummis's bill advocates for creating a U.S. strategic Bitcoin reserve to both strengthen the national economy and address the growing national debt. At the time, Senator Lummis was not optimistic in this legislation being passed because it would require a Republican sweep, winning the White House, Senate, and House of Representatives. However, in November, that's exactly what happened, and with President-elect Trump's pro-Bitcoin stance and appointment of pro-crypto members to key positions, including the chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission following the resignation of Gary Gensler, the likelihood of Lummis's bill being passed has increased significantly. Let's take a look at what's in the bill. The Bitcoin, or Boosting Innovation, Technology, and Competitiveness Through Optimized Investment Nationwide Act of 2024, aims to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the U.S. government. Here are the key points. Acquisition and storage. The U.S. Department of the Treasury is required to purchase 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years and hold them in a decentralized network of secure facilities across the United States. Long-term holding. All acquired Bitcoin must be held for at least 20 years unless used to pay down outstanding federal debt. State participation. States can voluntarily store their Bitcoin holdings in the reserve in segregated accounts. Federal Reserve involvement. The bill reduces the total amount of U.S. dollars Federal Reserve banks may hold in surplus and requires them to remit a certain amount of net earnings annually to purchase Bitcoin. The overall goal of the bill is to enhance the financial resilience and security of the United States by diversifying national assets to include Bitcoin. Van Eck, an asset management firm, recently predicted the U.S. could reduce its national debt by 36% by 2050 by establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. According to Van Eck, if the U.S. debt continues to grow at 5% annually and Bitcoin increases in value at an annual rate of 25%, by 2049, the U.S.'s Bitcoin investments could reduce the national debt by $42 trillion. If the federal government establishes a strategic Bitcoin reserve, states will also want Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Recently, Pennsylvania introduced legislation for establishing a Bitcoin reserve. Led by Representative Mike Cable, the bill enables the state to allocate a portion of its reserves to Bitcoin. Cable used Pennsylvania's $7 billion rainy day fund as an example of assets that could be allocated to Bitcoin. The bill calls for an initial allocation of 10% in Bitcoin, but Cable noted 1% to 5% might be a more practical starting point. Oklahoma introduced legislation that would allow workers to be paid in Bitcoin and vendors to accept Bitcoin as payment. According to Satoshi Action Fund co-founder Dennis Porter, 10 states currently have Bitcoin reserve legislation in the works. If proven successful at the state level, this same strategy could be applied by cities and municipalities as well. If the U.S. were to adopt a strategic Bitcoin reserve, other nation-states will likely do the same, and we are already seeing that start to play out. European Union Parliament member Sarah Nafu gave a speech suggesting member states invest in Bitcoin and build strategic national Bitcoin reserves. Japanese Parliament member Satoshi Hamada has recommended Japan consider a strategic Bitcoin reserve. In Poland, presidential candidate Mencen is calling for the creation of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. In Brazil's Chamber of Deputies, a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill has been proposed. At the end of last year, a new proposal was officially registered in Switzerland's Federal Gazette that seeks to constitutionally mandate the Swiss National Bank to hold Bitcoin on its balance sheet. A Russian state-owned domestic news agency reported State Duma deputy Anton Tkaitchov has proposed creating a Russian strategic Bitcoin reserve, which aligns with the praise Russian President Vladimir Putin gave Bitcoin following the seizure of Russia's foreign currency reserves in response to its invasion of Ukraine. The top 5 countries currently holding Bitcoin are the U.S. with just over 200,000 Bitcoin, China with almost 200,000 Bitcoin, the UK with 61,000 Bitcoin, Ukraine with almost 50,000 Bitcoin, Bhutan, who accumulated around 13,000 Bitcoin in its national strategic reserve, leveraging clean hydropower for Bitcoin mining, and El Salvador, who have been purchasing a Bitcoin a day since November 2022 with over 6,000 Bitcoin. If the US adopts a strategic Bitcoin reserve, we will see the game theory Satoshi Nakamoto explained in 2009 in a Bitcoin Talk forum, when they said, quote, "It might make sense just to get some in case it catches on. If enough people think the same way, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy." End quote. What Satoshi described is a coordination game in which players have two choices: adopt Bitcoin or ignore it. If players expect the network will continue to grow, as it has for the past 16 years, the only rational choice is to adopt, because over the long term, any player who ignores Bitcoin will put themselves at a competitive disadvantage against those who do adopt. With Trump about to re-enter the White House later this month, we'll know soon whether or not he will follow through on his pledge to create a national Bitcoin stockpile, or whether the U.S. will fall behind the other nation states already adopting Bitcoin. That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep upgrading.